Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk in a small town. On the outskirts of town, there is a rumor that has been passed down for generations about buses that never stop. People call them by many different names, but they all boil down to one thing: true scary stories about buses that appear in the middle of the night, picking up people and never returning them. These haunted stories are often told in coffee shops, at late-night gatherings, as the wind howls through the empty streets. Michael, a young man who has just moved to town, first heard the story from an old taxi driver. "You should avoid bus stops at 3 a.m., he said, his voice hoarse like the wind blowing through the cracks in the door. "Because people have stood there, gotten on the bus, and disappeared forever. It's one of the most famous true horror stories around here." At first, Michael just laughed it off, thinking it was just creepy stories to scare newcomers. But when he started working the night shift and had to return home late, the haunting gradually took hold of his mind. The bus stop was at the top of the street, where yellow lights cast a hazy glow across the rain-slicked pavement. It was like any other stop until the clock struck 3 a.m. that night. Michael, tired from his shift, stood at the stop, waiting for the last bus. The street was so empty he could hear the clock on his phone. Then, in the distance, the sound of an engine. A silver bus appeared, but it was unlike any Michael had ever seen. The windows were covered in fog, the rusted license plate almost gone. The door opened with a long hiss, like a cold breath. There was no driver, or at least Michael couldn't see the driver's face clearly. Inside, figures sat silently, heads bowed, as still as wax statues. The cold air from inside the bus made Michael shiver. He remembered the taxi driver's story, and his heart began to pound. Something urged Michael to step on. A faint whisper echoed in his head. "Get in. This is not just a short horror story. This is your destiny." He stepped onto the steps. The door slammed shut behind him. The whole car shuddered slightly, then rolled into the night. When Michael looked back, the street had disappeared, replaced by an endless road, covered in white mist on both sides. The passengers on the car did not move, did not breathe, only their eyes dim, empty, turned towards him. Michael trembled and sat down in the seat, his hands gripping the cold armrests. The roar of the engine echoed like a funeral drum, he realized. He had become part of a true horror story, and would probably never get off this bus. But the worst was yet to come. From the back seat, a figure stood up, tall and thin, his face hidden in darkness. Step by step, he advanced towards Michael. Each step was a dry echo, like nails scraping on wood. Michael wanted to scream, to run, but his body froze. He stopped right next to him, whispering in his ear, "Welcome to the ride with no destination." Here everyone thinks they only hear creepy stories, until they become a part of it. Michael felt the darkness swallow him. In a flash, he understood. This bus never stops, and the passengers never get off. There is only silence, the sound of the engine, and the endless horror. The story has only just begun. In the next episode, we will discover the secret of those motionless passengers, who they are, and why their souls are forever trapped on this bus with no destination. Next episode title: The Immortal Passengers on the Ghost Bus. The bus cabin was filled with a heavy silence. David sat trembling, his hands still clutching the cold armrests. His breathing was rapid, Each heartbeat felt like it was tearing his chest apart. But what terrified him the most was not the sound of the engine echoing in the night, but the empty eyes of the passengers looking at him. At first, they sat still as statues, heads bowed, bodies stiff. But when David stepped inside, it was as if an invisible command forced them all to turn around. Those soulless eyes turned towards him in unison. There was no emotion, no life, just deep dark holes, like deep wells, swallowing the souls of those in front of them. David wanted to scream, but his throat was dry. He told himself that he was just dreaming, that this was just one of those creepy stories that people made up to scare people. But the musty smell in the cabin, the cold air coming from the seats, the endless sound of the wheels rolling on the pavement, it was all too real. He knew he was trapped in a true horror story with no way out. The tall, thin man was still standing beside him, his face covered in darkness. He was like a gatekeeper, both welcoming and guarding. His voice rang out again, deep and creepy. "You will soon understand. On this bus, no one has a name, no one has a destination. All are just immortal passengers." David swallowed, struggling to speak. "They, who are they?" The man chuckled, a laugh without any sound. He pointed to a passenger sitting nearby. It was a woman wearing a tattered old dress, her long hair covering most of her face. When David looked closely, he saw that on her neck there was still a clear bruise, like the mark of a tightrope. Her eyes looked up, white and lifeless. Her mouth opened to mumble softly, "Get off, get off, I want to get off, But the bus did not stop. The passengers were motionless, trapped in an endless loop. David turned his head and saw a boy sitting in the back row. He was wearing a school uniform, clutching a torn school bag. His lips were purple, his hands were cold, but his eyes were as empty as space. It was not the gaze of a child, but of a lost soul. David suddenly understood. All the passengers here were trapped souls, people who had boarded this bus and never got off. They were not dead, nor were they alive. They only existed in soulless forms, immortal in the cruelest sense. He recalled the rumors, the haunted stories told in town. People said that the 3 a.m. bus was the boundary between life and death. Once on, the soul would be swallowed forever. Wandering on the road with no destination, David felt his blood freeze. He did not want to be a part of this short, scary story. He wanted to get out, wanted to rush down the street, but the bus door was locked, not a single crack. The tall, thin man leaned down and whispered, "Do you think you can leave? This is not the bus you chose, but the bus that chose you." The bus sped up. The fog on both sides was thick, covering all exits. Time seemed to stop. David felt like he was entering an endless space where everything was swallowed up in darkness. Then suddenly, from the last row of seats, a heart-wrenching scream rang out. Another passenger, a middle-aged man, suddenly stood up. He screamed, his eyes wide open in despair. "I've been here too long. Let me off, please." But as soon as he reached the door, his body shook violently. Blood gushed from his eyes, ears, and mouth, and then he collapsed, disappearing like smoke. Only the cold, empty seat remained. David was terrified, his whole body stiff. He realized that anyone who defied the rules of this bus would be erased from existence. In despair, David looked around. The lifeless faces still looked at him, there. White eyes like hundreds of cold lamps piercing his heart. He felt like he was going crazy. This was no longer a creepy story, but a nightmare reality. The tall, thin man put his hand on David's shoulder and whispered, "You'll get used to it. We all will get used to it. No one can get off, and no one wants to tell, because there's no one left to tell." David shivered, but deep inside, a fragile will still flashed. He didn't want to be swallowed up like those souls. He had to find a way out, even if it was just a fragile hope. It was all he had left. The bus sped on without stopping. Outside was darkness. Inside were immortal passengers. David wondered, if they were stuck here forever, would anyone ever find a way out? Or will he just become another part of the true scary stories that people whisper in the dark? At the end of this section, I leave a caption for the next episode. In a state of obsession, David begins to search for strange signs inside the bus, where the secret to escape may be hidden. But the truth he is about to discover is more terrible than death. Asterisk next. Episode title: The Secret Hidden Behind the Last Door on the Haunted Bus. The bus engine roared like an old beast out of breath. David sat motionless, his heart filled with fear. He still couldn't accept the fact that the passengers around him were no longer living people, but immortal souls trapped. But in a moment of despair, his eyes suddenly stopped at the end of the compartment, behind a long rows of seats covered in darkness. David realized there was a door. It was unlike any door he had ever seen on a normal bus. The iron door, tall and narrow, pitch black as if swallowing all light. Long scratches were carved on the surface, as if someone had used their fingernails in despair. David's heart pounded. He felt like there was something terrible behind that door, but it was also the only hope to escape this deadly bus. In his head echoed the folk tales, the true scary stories that people often told. There is always a final door, a boundary between the world of the living and the abode of darkness. David stood up, each step heavy in the silent carriage. The immortal passengers turned their heads to watch him, their eyes lifeless and white. Not a sound, not a movement other than that cold gaze. It felt like hundreds of souls were watching his every step. The tall, thin man appeared, blocking the path. He tilted his head. His whispering voice echoed like the wind whistling through the crack of the door. "You shouldn't go there. The final door is not for the living." David pursed his lips, gathering his courage. "If I don't open it, I will die here too. I don't want to become one of those forgotten, haunted stories." The man smiled crookedly. His eyes seemed to bore into David's soul. Then he stepped back, without another word, letting him continue toward the door. As David placed his hand on the doorknob, a chill ran down his spine. The rusted iron was icy cold, its surface covered in thick black slime. He took a deep breath, then pulled hard. The door made a piercing, creaking sound, like metal screaming. Behind the door was a dark, narrow, and endless hallway. Faint yellow lights hung in the air, their light flickering as if about to go out. The howling wind blew through the hallway, carrying with it the smell of mold and decay. David hesitated for a moment, then stepped in. The door behind him slammed shut, leaving behind a ringing sound as if sealing fate. The hallway led him deeper, each step echoing coldly. The walls were stained with dark red stains, like blood that had long since dried. As he walked, whispers began to ring out. At first it was vague, then clearer. The voices of men, women, even children. They were whispering cries for help, sobbing, begging to be released. David was surrounded by those sounds, as if thousands of souls were clinging to him. He walked faster, his heart pounding. Suddenly, from the end of the corridor, a figure appeared. It was a young woman, her long hair covering her face, her body thin. She stood still, then slowly raised her head. Her face appeared pale, her eyes dark and sunken, the corners of her mouth torn into a terrifying smile. "You're in the car too." The voice rang out, hoarse and drawn out. David stepped back, his whole body trembling. He understood that this was no longer a creepy story made up to scare him. This was a true horror story that he was forced to live. The woman approached, her skinny hand reaching out. A chill ran through her skin. This door does not lead to freedom. It only leads you to the last place of the devoured souls. David shivered, but still backed slowly. The corridor seemed to shrink. Darkness filled it. He knew he had opened a secret more terrifying than the bus ride. Footsteps echoed through the corridor. Dozens, hundreds. Shadows began to crawl out from the walls on both sides. Distorted faces, bony hands. They whispered, called his name, pulled him toward the endless abyss. David screamed, trying to run back, but the iron door had disappeared. He was trapped in the circle of tormented souls, and he realized the bus with no destination was just a gateway to an even deeper nightmare at the end of this section. I left a quote for the next episode. David had no way back, and the darkness was closing in. But in the midst of his despair, a strange voice calls out, leading him to a choice that could save him, or plunge him into the abyss forever. Next episode title: A Whisper of Guidance in the Maze of Souls. David was reeling in the darkness. The spirits were surrounding him, cold hands clutching his shoulders, back, and arms. His breathing was rapid. His heart was about to explode. There was no way out. The iron door had disappeared. The corridor had turned into a giant maze, each turn a deep abyss filled with darkness. He screamed in despair, but only received his own terrifying echo. The shadows whispered close to his ears, words blending together into a chorus of horror. There were cries, pleas, creepy laughter. All were the sounds of souls being swallowed up in a bus with no destination. David staggered, his feet hitting the cold stone floor. With each step, the corridor changed. Sometimes it narrowed, suffocating his body. Sometimes it widened into a vast space. But there was no light to guide him. Then, in the midst of the chaotic sea of sounds, a voice rang out, clear and distinct. The whisper was as soft as a breeze, but it had a strange hypnotic power. Go left, the only way to survive. David froze. He looked around. The darkness was overwhelming. All the souls were reaching out to him. But the voice was like a small flame lit in his mind. He gritted his teeth, turned left, and strangely, the path widened. The darkness thinned. The bony hands slowed. He realized there was a hidden truth. In this maze, not all souls wanted to devour him. There was some force trying to guide the way. But was it salvation? Or just an even more terrible trap? David continued walking along the cracked corridor. On the walls, he saw scrawled lines. They were cries for help in many languages, from those who had been imprisoned before him. The bloody words stood out the most, making him shiver. Do not believe the whisper. It does not lead outside. It leads to a place of no return. Cold sweat broke out all over his body. He hesitated, wondering if he should continue following the voice. But when he turned his head, the shadows behind him were already closing in, hundreds of arms outstretched, thousands of white eyes fixed on him. There was no other choice. He had to go on. The voice rang out again, softer, closer. You are on the right path. Just a little more. David trembled but did not stop. He went deeper into the maze. The yellow lights above him flickered as if they were about to go out. Beneath his feet, the ground cracked, revealing a deep void below. The cries of the spirit grew louder, but the whisper drowned them all out. Finally, he came to another door. The old wooden door, covered with moss. In the middle of the dark maze, David reached out to touch it. The voice rang out again. "Open it. Freedom is on the other side." He took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he turned the doorknob. But the moment the door opened, a cold wind blew, and a scream echoed throughout the space. Inside was not light, but a pitch-black abyss, spiraling down endlessly. David panicked, but before he could react, an invisible hand from within grabbed him tightly, pulling him toward the abyss. He struggled, trying to cling to the doorframe, his fingernails tearing the wood, but the suction was too strong. The whisper suddenly changed, becoming sinister, gritting each word. "You have chosen no way back." David screamed in despair, his entire body almost being pulled down into the abyss. But at that moment, another figure appeared behind him, grabbed his arm, and pulled him back. He turned his head. It was a middle-aged man, his eyes steadfast in the darkness. He looked at David and said softly, "Don't believe the whispers. If you want to survive, you must find the heart of the bus." David was stunned. The whispers hissed angrily. The darkness surged more violently, trying to pull both of them down into the abyss. But the man held David tightly, pushing the wooden door to slam it shut. The entire maze shook, screams echoed, and then fell silent. David gasped, his whole body trembling. He looked at the man, and before he could ask, he had disappeared like smoke. In his hand was only a small piece of paper on which was written a trembling line: "The heart of the bus, ... The only place where there is hope." He held the piece of paper tightly, knowing that his fate was still hanging in the balance. The souls had not given up. Other doors were waiting, and the heart of that ghostly bus was the destination he was forced to face. David has escaped the whisper trap, but now he must face the bus's true heart. It holds its darkest secret, and may be his only chance to escape. Next episode title: The Haunted Bus Heart and the Curse of Immortality. David slumped down in his seat, his hand clutching the small piece of paper as if clinging to the last ray of hope. The heart of the car. The curse of immortality. Those words repeated over and over in his head, making him both terrified and curious. He understood that if he wanted to escape this evil car, he had to find the place where all souls feared. The car shook violently, the yellow lights flickering on the ceiling, flickering like a dying breath. The immortal passengers sat still, but David clearly felt every soulless gaze watching him. They did not move, did not say a word, but that silence was more terrifying than any scream. The tall, thin man's voice rang out from the front of the car again. He was like a gatekeeper, his voice deep. "You want to find the heart? Then know that, once you find it, you will never be at peace again. This heart not only holds the soul, it swallows hope." David trembled, but did not retreat. He stood up and walked slowly toward the center of the bus. Each step echoed like a funeral drum. When he reached the 13th row of seats, the floor shook violently and cracked. From the gap, a red light surged up, filling the entire bus with a sickly glow. David looked down. Below, nestled in a block of rusted metal, was a giant, pitch-black heart. It beat slowly but heavily, as if it wanted to tear apart the space. Every time it contracted, The air in the bus was filled with the pungent smell of blood. He almost collapsed, his hands clutching the cold armrests of the seat. In an instant, he understood. This was the heart of the haunted bus, the source of all curses. Not the engine or the machinery that controlled the bus, but this monstrous heart. It sucked in the souls of the passengers, nurtured their immortal existence, and kept the bus from ever stopping. From the heart, black veins snaked across the floor, into the legs of the seats, through the armrests, and into each passenger. David was horrified to realize that each passenger was connected to the heart by those veins. They were like invisible chains, locking the soul in the motionless body, turning them into living statues forever. David held his head, trying to stop the nausea. This was no longer a creepy story, but the embodiment of a true horror story. But he knew if he wanted to escape, he had to find a way to destroy this heart. At that moment, the familiar whispering voice rang out again. But this time it was not gentle, it was shrill, angry. Don't touch it. You belong to us now. Sit down and become a part of this immortal, short, scary story. David trembled, but a strange force urged him. He bent down, trying to look closely. At the heart, on its surface were deeply engraved symbols, like an ancient ritual. Black blood seeped from the cracks, falling onto the floor in thick drops. He was about to reach out to touch it, but suddenly a cold hand grabbed his wrist. David looked up. One of the passengers had stood up. It was the schoolboy he had seen before, his face pale, his eyes lifeless. The boy opened his mouth, his voice hoarse. Don't destroy it. If you do, we will all be destroyed, including you. David was stunned. In the boy's eyes, there was a fragile light that seemed to be asking for help. He didn't know if it was true or just a trap. Inside him, two streams of thought collided violently. Destroy the heart to find a way out, or keep it intact to avoid an unimaginable tragedy. The beating of the heart grew stronger, echoing in his mind like thousands of drums. The black veins on the floor began to move, like snakes tightening. The space was thick, filled with cold. David knew he was about to make a decision. He took a deep breath, his eyes burning with determination. If this heart was the source of the curse, then only it could open up a chance to escape. He couldn't just sit there and wait for death. No matter what the consequences were, he had to try. David gritted his teeth, using all his strength to pull his hand away from the boy, then moved closer. Black veins immediately shot up, wrapping around his legs, squeezing tightly. He screamed, trying to pull away. His breathing was rapid, his eyes were dizzy with pain. Just as he was about to touch the heart, a scream echoed throughout the car. The tall and thin man rushed forward, his eyes glowing like hot coals. He raised his hand, and from his palm shot out a stream of black smoke, knocking David to the floor. His voice was loud and gloomy. You are not allowed to destroy this heart. It is our soul, our immortal existence. If it stops beating, everything will disappear. David lay motionless, his chest heaving. He stepped closer, his red eyes staring straight at him. You must choose, David. Become part of us, or be wiped out together. The carriage shook violently. The immortal passengers raised their heads in unison. In those lifeless eyes, a strange light flashed. David understood. This was a life and death moment. David was faced with the final choice: destroy his heart to escape the carriage, or accept becoming an immortal part of it. The answer would reveal an even more horrifying truth. Asterisk, next episode title: the curse of immortality and the horrible choice. The cabin shook violently, as if the giant heart was controlling everything. David collapsed to the floor, his hands clawing for balance. The beating of his heart echoed in his head, pounding heavily against his chest. Each beat seemed to synchronize, with his breathing making him a part of it. The tall, thin man stood before him, his red eyes glowing brightly in the darkness. His voice was deep as thunder. "What will you choose? Accept the curse of immortality and sit as a passenger, or resist it and disappear with all of us?" David trembled, but a spark of resistance flared up inside him. He looked around. The immortal passengers had begun to move. Their lifeless eyes were now flashing in unison, glowing a pale red like Willow the Wisp. Creepy whispers came from their throats. The sound thickened the air, as if urging him to surrender. David closed his eyes, trying to calm himself. He recalled the mysterious man who had saved him in the maze. The heart of the car, the only place where there is hope. Those words were like a torch burning in the darkness. If hope lay here, then he could not give up. He pushed himself up with his hands and walked towards the heart. The black veins immediately wrapped around his legs, pulling him down. David screamed, trying to break free. His skin was torn open. Fresh blood spread out, but was immediately absorbed by the veins, dissolving into the giant heart. The heart beat even harder, as if it was happy to swallow a new soul. The tall and thin man laughed, his laughter echoing throughout the car. "You see, you cannot escape. All those who resist become part of the power of this heart. That is why no one leaves the car." David gritted his teeth, a familiar whisper resounding in his head. But this time it was not a malicious voice, but a weak, trembling sound. It came from the heart itself. "Help me, free me." He froze. In that moment, he understood that this heart was not only the source of the curse, but also the prison of an ancient soul. Perhaps if he destroyed it, he could free that soul and himself. David gathered all his courage, trying to break free from the veins. He pulled out from his pocket the sharp piece of metal he had picked up in the hallway earlier. It wasn't a weapon, just a piece of rusty steel. But at this moment, it became his only hope. He rushed towards the heart, the piece of steel in his hand shining under the ghostly red light. The immortal passengers screamed in unison, their screams echoing like a storm of souls. The tall, thin man rushed forward, his black hand reaching down. But David was faster, gathering all his strength to stab the piece of steel into the heart. A terrible explosion resounded. Red light flashed, dazzling throughout the car. The heart shook, black blood gushed out. Screams echoed throughout the space, unknown whether it was from hundreds of souls or the heart in pain. David was thrown out, hitting the seat hard. The entire bus shook as if it was about to explode. The immortal passengers fell down, their white eyes gradually closing. Some bodies disappeared in the mist. Others were left with only cold, empty seats. The tall, thin man roared angrily, his figure fading. "You have destroyed everything, but the price will be even more terrible." He disappeared in the black smoke, leaving the bus filled with the smell of blood and ashes. David gasped, his whole body limp. He looked down. The heart had cracked open, black blood flowing all over the floor. But in the midst of the rubble, a faint glow shone. In it, he saw the silhouette of a woman dressed in white, her eyes gentle. "Thank you," her voice rang out, then disappeared with the light. Before David could regain his composure, the bus roared. It rushed at a terrifying speed, The light outside the window turned into an endless streak. He realized that although the heart had been destroyed, the bus had not stopped. Perhaps the nightmare had just begun. The heart had been destroyed, but the bus was still rushing in the darkness. David began to realize that there was another secret hidden behind everything, something even more terrifying than the devil's heart. Next episode title: The Secret After the Heart Stopped Beating. After the giant heart broke, the bus shook as if it was about to collapse. David sat down on the floor, breathing heavily, his whole body limp. He thought that when his heart stopped beating, everything would end. But the bus continued to move. At a terrifying speed, the immortal passengers began to disappear. Their bodies gradually faded, dissolving into nothingness like smoke. The whispers of help gradually died down. The bus became empty, leaving only a few cold seats. David thought he was free, but another feeling crept into his mind. This silence was not a sign of safety, but a sign of a new nightmare. Suddenly, the light outside the window distorted. It was no longer the night with thick fog, but instead, a swirling black void, like a giant gate waiting. The bus rushed straight towards it, the wheels screeching, the metal colliding, creating a deafening sound. David stood up in a panic. He ran to the front of the car, but the driver's seat was empty. No one was driving, and yet the car was still moving. His hands trembled as he touched the steering wheel, which was as stiff as a block of stone, unable to turn. The wind howled outside, and suddenly, the cabin echoed with the familiar voice of the tall, thin man. He had disappeared when the heart was destroyed, but now his voice rang out, stronger and angrier than ever. You think you've won, David. The heart is only the beginning. The car's true soul is not there. It lies in the very road you're driving down. David was stunned, his heart pounding. He looked through the window, seeing the swirling void ahead getting closer. From inside the black gate, giant figures emerged. They were no longer human souls, but distorted, tall entities with glowing red eyes, stretching out their long arms as if to drag the car into the abyss forever. The car went dark. The lights on the ceiling exploded one after another, sparks flying. David rushed to the back of the car, hoping to find another way out, but there was only dense darkness behind. The windows wouldn't open, the car doors were locked like steel. Blocks. He realized there was no way out this time. The tall and thin man's laughter echoed, mixed with the screams of thousands of souls. You destroyed the heart, but you cannot destroy the road. This is the vortex of souls, where all passengers are forever lost. You have only entered the deepest part of the curse. David trembled, sitting down on the floor. His head was dizzy. His eyes were blurred with fear. He wondered if the decision to destroy the heart was a mistake. Perhaps he had angered the force controlling this car, causing it to open up an even deeper hell. Just then, the gentle voice of the woman in the halo from before rang out. Her voice was weak, as if coming from afar. Don't give up. The secret is still there. The key lies in the final destination. David raised his head, eyes wide open. The final destination. But this bus was originally called No Destination. Or was that spiral gate the final destination he had to face? The bus was getting closer and closer to the gate. The space shook violently. The metal screeched painfully. David felt as if his body was being torn apart by an invisible suction force. He tried to hold on to the seat, but knew he couldn't resist that terrible force forever. In desperation, David shouted, "If this is the final destination, Then let me know the truth. Show me what's waiting on the other side. The bus suddenly exploded in a blinding red light. Everything disappeared, leaving David in an endless void. His ears were ringing. His heart seemed to stop beating. When he opened his eyes, he no longer saw the bus compartment, but stood on an endless road with abysses on both sides. The sky pitch black without stars. In the distance, he saw a ruined house, shining faintly in the darkness. The whispering voice rang out again. Go there, you will know the whole truth. David took a deep breath, knowing that there was no turning back. He walked towards the house. Each step seemed to be a deeper step into a nightmare he had never imagined. David had stepped out of the bus compartment and faced a new road. The ruined house ahead hid the horrifying truth, where he would learn the true secret of the bus with no destination. Next episode title: The Ruined House and the Buried Truth. David walked heavily on the endless path. The surrounding space was pitch black, with only the abyss on both sides and the incessant howling of the wind. In the distance, the ruined house appeared, lonely and strange, as if it had existed since, before the world was formed. As he approached, David felt a chill in the air. The brick walls were cracked, the roof had collapsed in half, the wooden door was crooked. From inside, a faint red light emitted, flickering like a will-o'-the-wisp. He hesitated for a moment, but then a whisper rang out in his mind. Come in. You will know the truth. He pushed open the rotten door. It made an eerie creaking sound. The air inside was thick with the smell of mold, mixed with the pungent smell of dried blood. The floor was covered with thick dust, but there were footprints, fresh and distinct. David's heart pounded. He was not alone in this place. The house had only one large room. In the middle of the room was an old wooden table. On the table were dozens of tattered notebooks, yellowed papers with scribbled words. David opened one with trembling hands, his eyes wide as he read the scribbled lines. March 12th, I got on the bus at 3 a.m. Now I don't know where I am. They said this was a bus with no destination. I was so scared. He turned to another page. June 24th. The heart of the bus was beating right under the floor. I saw blood flowing. I didn't dare touch it. Someone said if I broke it, everything would end. The lines stopped abruptly, stained with blood. David gasped, realizing that these notebooks were the diaries of the passengers who had disappeared. These were no longer fabricated creepy stories. These were living proof of the true horror stories he was trapped in. Suddenly, a noise rang out from the upper floor. Although the house seemed to have collapsed, there was still a wooden staircase leading upstairs. David raised his head, cold sweat dripping down. Heavy footsteps echoed from the ceiling. He walked towards the stairs, each wooden step creaking under his feet. When he reached the top, the narrow hallway opened with closed doors on both sides. From inside, a soft, steady knocking sound echoed, as if something was trying to escape. David swallowed, trying to calm down. He touched a door and opened it gently. Inside was a dark room with a chair in the middle of the room. On the chair was a set of tattered clothes, but there was no body inside. Only the sound of wheezing came from the void. He panicked and slammed the door shut, his heart pounding. He continued on until he reached the last door. From inside came a distinct whisper. David, the voice calling his name, made his whole body freeze. The door slowly opened without him touching it. Inside, the room was glowing red. In the middle of the room was a giant mirror, cracked in many places, but still reflecting a clear image. David approached and looked inside. He saw himself sitting on the passenger seat of the bus, eyes lifeless, motionless like the others. He panicked and backed away, but the image in the mirror was still following him, eyes wide open, mouth moving. "You are part of the bus. No one can escape." David trembled, about to turn and run away, when from the mirror a hand reached out, grabbed his arm tightly, cold, hard, and pulled him closer. He screamed, trying to pull away, but the pulling force grew stronger. The image in the mirror smiled, a horrifyingly distorted smile in that moment. David understood that this ruined house not only held the memories of the lost souls, but was also the final trap to keep him here forever. David is pulled into a haunted mirror that reflects the horrific fates of the passengers who never returned. But on the other side of the mirror, an even more terrifying truth awaits. Next episode title: The Ghost Mirror and the Horrifying Truth. David screamed as the cold hand from the mirror yanked him inside. His body passed through the glass like a layer of thick, bone-chilling water. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in another room, exactly like the one outside but inverted, darker and more decayed. Faded old photographs hung on the walls. David walked closer, his heart suddenly tightening. They were pictures of missing people he had seen in old newspapers in town. Gaunt faces, vacant eyes, all passengers on the bus to no destination. He walked slowly through the corridor of mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different image. Some showed him sitting motionless on the bus, his eyes blank. Some showed him screaming, being dragged to the floor by invisible hands. He shuddered, not knowing what was real and what was just an illusion. In the middle of the room, a wooden chair was set up. On the seat was a familiar figure, a tall, thin man. But this time, his face was clearly visible. Sunken eye sockets, ashen skin, a smile that stretched from ear to ear. He tapped his fingers lightly on the armrest, his voice echoing, "Welcome to the other side." This is where the true fate of those who boarded the bus lies. Did you think that destroying your heart would free you? No, you only opened a deeper prison. David stepped back, but behind him, the mirrors changed color, their surfaces pitch black, and then lifeless faces appeared one by one. Hundreds of white eyes stared at him, making the air heavy and suffocating. The tall, thin man stood up and approached. He whispered, "Have you seen your reflection in the mirror? That is your fate. No matter how you run, the end will be the same, sitting down in the passenger seat, motionless and disappearing like everyone else." David clenched, his fists, his whole body trembling. "No, I won't accept it. I want to escape." He laughed horribly. The laughter was loud and long, mixed with the cracking of the surrounding mirrors. From the cracks, skinny hands reached out, trying to grab David. He panicked, struggling towards the door. But the door disappeared, leaving only walls covered. In mirrors, in desperation, David remembered the woman's voice that had whispered advice to him. The key lies at the final destination. He looked around, trying to find a clue. And then, in the corner of the room, a different mirror stood out. It did not reflect a distorted image, but only showed a long path leading to a portal. Of light, David rushed forward. Invisible hands grabbed his limbs, pulling him back. His breathing was rapid. Cold sweat broke out all over his body. He screamed, gathering all his strength, smashing the mirror dot at that moment. Light flooded the room. Heart-rending screams rang out. and all the mirrors shattered at once. The tall, thin figure roared angrily, and his figure melted into ashes. The pitch-black hands disappeared, leaving only David kneeling on the ground. When he raised his head, he saw that in front of him was no longer the mirror room, but a wide road stretching out in the dim light. In the distance, a giant, faint figure appeared, looking like the silhouette of an ancient, deserted bus station. David stood up, trembling, knowing that this was where the final truth was hidden. All the answers, all the secrets about the bus, with no destination, were waiting for him ahead. David had escaped the ghost mirror, but now he faced a deserted station in the dim light. There, the final truth about the haunted bus would gradually be revealed. Next episode title: The Deserted Station and the Final Secret. David stood frozen on the dim road. Before him was a desolate station, vast but dilapidated, standing alone in the endless black space. The pillars were broken, the roof tiles collapsed, the signs tilted, blurred and unreadable. The wind howled through the cracks, creating a howling sound like the wailing of a soul. He stepped inside. The inside of the station was cold. Dust covered every row of waiting seats. On the walls were old posters, the ink faded but still readable. Last trip, 3 a.m. David shivered. This was no coincidence. That ghostly bus had existed for a long time, and this station was the starting point. David's footsteps echoed in the empty space. Each step seemed to awaken a forgotten past. He stopped when he saw a small ticket office in the corner of the station. The glass window was broken. The inside was covered in dust. David bent down and saw a tattered old leather notebook lying on the table. He opened it, and the words trembled. "I am the last surviving station master. They told me not to tell, but I can't bear it any longer. That bus never stops. It devours souls. It takes sinners to a place from which they can never escape." David swallowed and continued reading. "They say that if you are brave enough to go to the end of the road, you will see the real station, the ultimate truth, but no one has ever come back to tell it. This may be the last time I write. If you find it, be careful. Don't look the driver in the eyes." He closed the notebook with a trembling hand, his heart pounding. The driver, but on the bus he had been on, the driver's seat was empty. Could the driver's spirit still exist, but hidden somewhere deeper in the darkness? At that moment, a dull sound echoed through the station. David raised his head. From afar, in the fog, a dim yellow light appeared. The sound of the engine sounded so familiar that it sent a chill down his spine. An old bus slowly drove in, the wheels grinding on the broken tiles. The door opened with a long hiss. David saw that the cabin was empty. Only the driver's seat was dark, hidden behind the glass. He hesitated, taking a few steps back, but the gentle voice of the woman who had led the way echoed in his mind. "If you want to escape, you have to get on again. This is the last bus." David bit his lip, his heart about to explode. He knew this was the decisive moment. If he didn't get on, he would be stuck in this void forever. But if he did, he might have to face the most terrible truth. He took a deep breath, then stepped onto the steps. At that moment, the cabin lit up. Rows of seats full of lifeless passengers appeared in the blink of an eye. But this time, everyone turned to look at him, their mouths whispering in unison, "Welcome back." David trembled as he sat down on the seat near the door. The car shook slightly, the engine roaring. He looked forward. The driver's seat was still in darkness. Then suddenly, a pair of red eyes appeared, shining like embers in the dark. The driver had finally appeared. David faced the ruined station and boarded the last bus. Now, he had to face the mysterious driver, the spirit that controlled everything. The final truth awaited him. Next episode title: The Mysterious Driver and the Final Truth. David sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the driver's seat. In the pitch-black darkness, the driver's red eyes glowed like two ghostly torches. They were not the eyes of a living person, but smoldering eye sockets filled with hatred and power. A voice rang out, deep and deep, as if coming from the ground. You have destroyed hearts, escaped the maze, passed through the mirror, but you will never escape me. I am the driver. I am the one who keeps this bus going forever. David trembled, but he did not retreat. He shouted, "Who are you? Why must you imprison the souls of so many innocent people?" The driver laughed. His laughter echoed throughout the cabin, long and harsh, like the sound of metal clashing. You call them innocent? No, they are all guilty. They got on the bus because of greed, because of lies, because of betrayal. I only took them where they belonged. David was stunned. What about him? He had committed no crime. He was just an accidental prisoner. As if reading his mind, the driver whispered, "You too. Your crime was curiosity. You listened to the warning, but you still stood at the bus stop at 3 a.m. You chose to get on, and now there is no turning back." The car shook violently, the windows exploded, and black wind rushed in like thousands of screaming souls. The soulless passengers raised their heads in unison, their eyes blank as they turned toward David. The whispers combined into a terrifying chorus. "Sit down, ... stay, ... forever, ... David was panicking, but his heart still burned with resistance. He remembered everything he had experienced: the monstrous heart, the soul maze, the ghostly mirror. He had never given up. Now it was the same. He stood up and moved forward. The driver roared, and the car sped up. The road ahead turned into an endless vortex, sucking in everything. He raised his hand, his charred hand gripping the steering wheel tightly. "You don't have the power to change the ending." David shouted loudly, using all his strength to rush straight to the driver's seat. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, struggling with the driver. In that moment, light flashed from the piece of paper he was still holding. The message: the heart of the car. The only place where there is hope. Even though his heart was destroyed, his will to live became the flame that lit up the car's cabin. A loud explosion rang out. The blinding white light engulfed everything. David felt his body being torn into thousands of pieces, then sinking into the endless void. When he opened his eyes, he found himself standing alone on the familiar street of the town. The bus stop in front, the wooden bench wet with night dew, the clock showing exactly 3 a.m. There was no bus, no soul, only the gentle sound of the wind. David trembled, unable to believe his eyes. He had returned. But when he reached into his pocket, he saw the piece of paper still there. On it, the trembling words had just appeared. "You have survived, but the bus will return. Be careful when night comes." David looked up, looking at the deserted street. In the mist, he caught a glimpse of the yellow lights flashing in the distance. Along with the faint sound of the engine, he understood that the nightmare was not really over. And somewhere, the bus with no destination was still waiting for curious people to get on. ... The story of the bus with no destination had ended, but other terrifying mysteries were still lurking in the darkness. Are you ready to join Reddit Mystery in new true scary stories, where the line between life and death is more fragile than ever. The title suggests the new series, Haunted Roads and Journeys with No Return.